It's time again for another eye-opening round of Pension Pursuit, the game where taxpayers, young and old, face off against their own state politicians and state employees. So far, we've seen how state politicians tell taxpayers and state employees that they won't raise taxes or cut services in order to get re-elected and win the game. But as you've learned, state politicians have to balance their budgets. Without tax increases or savings from cutting services, they're effectively diverting massive amounts of money from their pension systems to cover budget shortfalls. They do this by making risky investments that they hope will make up for the money they didn't contribute in the past, but should have. In this round, we'll walk through how state and local governments are able to hide that risk in their budgeting for public sector pensions. Let's start with an example. Say a state politician needs to balance their budget, and they decide to gamble on risky investments to the pension fund, rather than set aside more money in safer investments. Think about Ben, a state employee who is expecting a pension from this fund. Say hi, Ben. The state owes Ben $100,000 per year, every year after he retires. Assuming he lives another 30 years after he retires, the total amount owed to Ben will be approximately $3 million. He has worked for 20 years, and he's going to work for another 10 years before he retires. So if the state wants to be prudent, it should have accumulated about $2 million for him at this point. However, because state politicians want to keep spending high and taxes low, the state has contributed only half, $1 million, spending the rest on services taxpayers enjoy. The state politicians will take the $1 million contribution they've made and invest it aggressively to try to recover the $1 million they've used for current operations. Public officials can argue under state and local government accounting rules that the $1 million devoted to risky investments would be expected to earn an annual return of 7.75%. They're telling everyone it will double in 10 years and be worth $2 million at the end of the period. Because the $2 million is assumed to be covered in 10 years, they maintain that there's no need to disclose the $1 million they spent on current operations as debt. If you were able to follow the same rules, you could borrow $100,000, spend $50,000 of it, invest $50,000, and claim that you have no debt. Our state employee Ben is curious if future contributions are enough to cover the pension fund. Yes, those are intended to get Ben to $3 million at retirement. Ben may now be wondering about his own contributions. Well, those are not in a locked box for you. A lot of your contributions are being used to pay current retirees, and as a result, your pension will end up being underfunded. When you think about it, this setup resembles a pyramid scheme. Relying on the contributions of the current and future workforces to pay for the pensions of today's retirees is risky and could possibly collapse the entire scheme if hiring of new employees slows. So let's summarize what's going on here. Governments are ignoring risk in their budgeting for pension obligations. Their actuaries are being wildly optimistic about investment returns, and the budget process fails to take into account what happens in the likely event those returns are not achieved. What's more, governments are using unrealistically long periods for paying down unfunded liabilities, and assuming people aren't going to live as long as current mortality tables suggest. This all leads us to a very important question. Why is this happening? Well, it's much easier to fudge the numbers than it is to make politically difficult decisions about the actual trade-offs between making pension promises and spending on current services. It postpones the pain. The game is getting a little one-sided. In the next round of Pension Pursuit, we'll examine why states should not set their budgets based on expected rates of return,